so-called dynamic test cases generation. First, let me explain what are dynamic test cases, because it's something I think unique for our framework. Basically, when you have a test, what is the need? The need is that sometimes managers or non-technical people, many QAs, they want to see what automated tests you have and what they do. And before, in my past companies where I worked as a QA architect, we built a similar solution, but it generated like an HTML with a long list containing the name of the test and then some of the steps of it. And then you can send it through email or give it to someone so that they can read it and find what the tests are doing. Because many managers asked us, okay, I want to see what your automation is doing, or the many QAs want to see what the automation is doing so that they know what is not covered, so that they can cover it manually. And for one of our clients, they requested a similar thing, and we were hardly thinking how to make it more general and think of a solution so that when you run your test, this plugin will create automatically test cases in popular test case management systems. But this is not all. You will have, as I will show you, for example, here in qTest, you will have in human readable format all of the steps that the test is doing. And for example, for the assertions, you have the expected result. You have linked, for example, some requirements. And also when even the more exciting part here is that this test case will continue to be updated when you make changes to your tests. For example, the next time you run your test, and if you make changes to the steps or to the test data, the plugin will make sure to update it correctly. So these test cases will be maintained over time, which is really great. For now, first I will show you our plugin for qTest, then I will show you a similar plugin for Azure DevOps test case management system. Let me show you. First, you can check our documentation here under product integrations. First, I will open the qTest one. As you can see here, it's explained how you can start the plugin. The first basic thing is that you need to install this NuGet package to your test project. And then you need to add this in your test initialize file. Let me show you. Here it is. This is my test project. And then I need to go to the test initialize file that is contained in all tests BELLATRIX projects. And here at the bottom, as shown in the documentation, I need to add these 5 lines. Basically, we enable the dynamic test cases plugin. We mentioned that we will use the qTest integration. And also these 3 lines, we need them so that they basically open listeners in our controls and services that will create these human readable steps and expected results. The next step is to open your this file here, test framework settings. As you know, you can control many things here from the framework and the different parts of it. I will not show my particular one because it's connected to my real qTest account, but I will show you what is it. You need to have this dynamic test cases settings section. You need to mention that it's enabled. You need this service address. You can use a token or username and pass. It's preferable to use the token. Then you need to mention the project. When you first log in and navigate to somewhere, it's part of the URL. And then if you have some custom fields part of your test case, you can mention them here in this kind of a format. The ID, the value, this is the default, and the display name. And the last step is to connect your real tests with, right now, you need, as many of the other things in BELLATRIX, you can use attributes. You need to use over the test class this dynamic test case attribute, and you need to mention the suite ID where your test case will be added. Let me show you. Here is my qTest project. This is my suite here, and you can get the ID from here. And this is actually my project ID. And when you run your test, it will be created in this folder. Next, of course, it is possible not all tests from the your test class to be added as dynamic test cases. But in order to do so, you need to use this dynamic test case attribute over the test that you want to be added as test case. Something special to the qTest integration is that you need to specify a unique ID here that you need to generate. I usually use a website called and you can generate a unique ID from here and paste it here. Also, there is, I think, something here in Visual Studio. You can use this create GUID and generate here one and copy it and use it. This is used so that when the test case is created in qTest, this is the binding thing that later on we find the test case the second time when you run it. We will find it in qTest and we will update it. Without it, we don't know, because, for example, if you change here the title, we won't be able to find it and we will create it again, and it will be maintenance hell otherwise. Again, this is something only for qTest. For, as you see, for Azure, it's a little bit easier. And optionally, you can specify a description that will be added to your qTest. Basically here, I will run this test. It makes a purchase in our demo website. Let's run it. And we'll check the results in the qTest. I promise I will run this test only once because it's the same test every time for all of the integrations, but I will show you in each system what will happen. The build here is a little bit slower because I'm running it in the main source code. Okay, never mind. I will just show you what will happen. In the other window. I played with the solution like 2 minutes before the webinar, and
it was running.
It was running, but
now it's not, and that's it.
Yeah. Okay. So here it is. This is actually the example that I ran 5 minutes ago. It will generate this title. The ID that we mentioned in the attribute will be added here later on through a search query. We will find it. Then here you can see all of the steps that the test did. What type, in which field, what it asserted, and so on. As you can see here, it is asserted control something, and here is the expected result. this is valid for all assertions. And if there was a requirement mentioned in the attribute above, it will be added here. I just didn't connect my Jira with it. But if you connect Jira and the stories are synced like requirements and you mention the require ID, your requirement will be linked here in the requirements tab. Okay, the next one is our a similar integration test case management system with Azure DevOps. In order to use it, again, you can first go to our documentation. Again, here we explain what is dynamic test case. I will show you in a bit directly in my tests account. Again, the configuration is similar. First, instead of the qTest plugin, you need to install BELLATRIX dynamic test cases, Azure DevOps. And then instead of qTest, here you need to use Azure DevOps dynamic test cases. Let me show you. Here again, in the test initialize file, instead of qTest here, I think I know what I broke. But here you need to mention use Azure DevOps dynamic test cases. Again, the second part is to use this specific dynamic test case settings for Azure, where you point your URL, you mention the token, and the only two things that you need is the organizational name and the project name. And the usage is quite similar. Instead of, using dynamic test cases, you need to use Azure DevOps dynamic test cases attribute. And you can mention the area path, iteration path, and if you have stories, epics, bugs, etc., you can link them mentioning here the ID. And again, as with the qTest, you just need to mention on top of each test here. You can optionally set another name for the test case and maybe a description. And the result will be as here. You have the title, you have again the same steps and expected results. Then as you can see here, since I have a requirement, real requirement here, this is an epic, so it's linked here. And what else? The area and the iteration are set as mentioned in the attribute. Also, as part of the summary, there is, as you can see, a precondition. This precondition came from, you can add custom steps and assertions and other stuff through this test cases service here. As you can see here, you can add a step, you can add a precondition, you can use this assertion, additional property, you can use it again in page objects so that you can reuse it. Again, if in the test initialize are added, our listeners will add the steps for you automatically for most parts, but you can again add something custom. And maybe the coolest part here is that our plugin will associate automatically your automated test to the test case here. And this is why you don't need to mention this GUID stuff or custom IDs, yes, etc.
A bit better than qTest. It's
associated automatically. Basically, you can do, if you use Azure for test cases, you can do a similar thing if you have used it from here, associate the test case. We use a similar API, but through code in our plugin, and we will do that automatically. So this is it. Let's go on with the presentation. The next thing as part of our plugins is the automatic bug logging. What is it? Well, sometimes it's a little bit tricky whether to use it or not. I just want to mention that it may be valuable, but if most of your tests are stable, meaning that most of the time all of the tests are green, because if they are failing a lot of tests all the time, it may be not a good idea to turn it on. But if you turn it on, the thing that it will do, it will detect on test failure whether your test failed or not, and it will connect to the respected bug tracking system, and it will create automatically a bug for you. But as you can see on the screenshot, it will populate the title. It will contain, again, as with the test case, steps to reproduce that the test did before the test to fail. Then you have this system info, which is basically the the exception message, the stack trace, so that you can check what happened. And what else? Also, as I will show you, it will actually attach a screenshot and a
I
video
wanted
recording.
to ask about that, yes.
Yeah, but let me show you how to turn it on. For Azure DevOps, here again in the product integrations, you will find this section. First, again, we describe what is it. And as with the test case managements, you just need, again, additional NuGet package called Bug Reporting Azure DevOps. And there is a similar, in the test initialize, you need to use a similar syntax here. Let's directly check here in the example project. Here it is. You need to turn on the plugin. Again, you have these 3 listeners. This will bind the listeners for the controls. This will bind the listeners for the ensure assertion methods. And this will bind the listeners for layout assertions that they test responsive designs. If you don't need some of them, you can turn them off. And then you need to enable this one, use Azure DevOps bug reporting. And then you don't, again, of course, you have a similar, in the JSON settings file, you need to add this section, which is similar to the one for Azure DevOps test cases, but you have 2 additional fields called default priority and default severity, which will basically populate these 2 fields with default values. You don't need to use any attributes, etc. The plugin, as mentioned, will automatically detect when some of your tests fail and will create a bug for you. Let me show you. Here it is, again, in Azure DevOps, a sample bug that was part of the image. Here you can see a human readable steps to reproduce, similar to our BDD logging. Then you have the exception in the stack trace. You see here the default priority and severity. And what else? As you can see here, I have the video that I turn on above my tests and the full page screenshot on the test failure, as you can see here. We have a similar integration with Jira. Again, here you can go to bug reporting Jira. The different thing, again, like with the test cases, is that only you need to mention use Jira bug reporting, and you have a little bit different bug reporting settings here for the Jira